Baby Watch 2017 is still in process. I thought perhaps I was going to get to do an Andy-less episode, which people have been asking for a long time, because Andy's wife, Mercedes, is not just pregnant, but now overdue. They were due on Mother's Day, which would have been wonderful.
Yeah.
But instead, Shepherd.
Yes.
Shep, as we call him. Shep to the Shep.
Yep. He's heard far too much going on outside the womb, and he's like, no, I'm good.
He's good.
I'm good.
So it's 4 days. It's due date plus 4 today. And so we're on baby watch. We could get a call right now.
Yep, right now.
And as the great Patch Adams, would say, I'm a doctor at your cervix.
Okay.
So,
oh, Robin.
Yeah, I know.
How we miss you.
Seriously. Did you get that though?
Yeah.
The cervix bar. Okay.
Oh yeah, I did.
Yeah, okay.
I did.
I didn't get it initially. My wife had to explain it when we watched the movie. So I just have stored that one away.
Oh, I thought it was an EDM band.
That's probably that would be a great. Okay. So we're cutting the small talk. The Ducks suck. I mean, so they did.
Oh, that wasn't even my small talk today.
They broke the curse, and then now they're just going to get tromped by the Predators.
We'll see. I'm encouraged. We're doing okay.
What do you mean? You've lost 2.
Yeah, we've lost 2, but the gameplay has been good and solid, and I actually thought it would look worse than it has. So okay. I'm a little hopeful now.
Okay.
Yep. I'm a little hopeful. I do have some sad news of a passing that has taken place in my life. However,
oh no. Your love for beer.
No, that is incorrect.
Your love for coffee.
So, in addition, unfortunately, to Chris Cornell passing last night.
Justy woke me up at 6:23 this morning.
Yeah.
To say Chris had passed. And
yeah.
I'm like, damn.
I know. I was super bummed out.
Right.
Yeah. But my wife broke my Chemex yesterday. And so,
oh, wow. Okay, for those of you that don't know what this is dumb. So there's coffee, and then there's like highbrow coffee, and then there's Chemex, where there's this process, and it's dumb. It's like baking coffee and sifting and sorting, and it's one of those things where people who have too much time and too much disposable income get into stuff like this, and what can we say?
So untrue.
What can we say?
I spend so much less money on coffee.
And you think Mercedes accidentally broke this? I think not, my friend. I think not. We could interview her later.
Let's get a witness.
So here's what I like. All right. So there's a guy named Phil Wickham who I've met and we're fans, and he's a recording artist. Mm-hmm. And we heard Andy forwarded me an email from his bass player, and we all know the bass player is really the heart of the band.
Yes.
And it was a very encouraging email, but here was the signature line, all right? The signature line right at the end was, hockey is dumb, comma, Josh.
Let me tell you about dumb.
First of all, Josh, if you are a regular podcaster, you get gold stars. Right now, I will gift you a Patreon account just for that simply signature line right there. That is amazing. So Chemex, hockey, what were you going to say about dumb, since we're on the topic?
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of dumb, Josh, I could point you to a playlist of podcasts of why people are leaving the church in regards to haze and smoke and lights on stage.
Oh, whoa. Josh. Okay.
But not your bass player, so you don't have any control over that.
No, he doesn't. He just is the heart of the band. All right.
That's right.
We're going to start today in a regular series that we're going to do called Embarrassed by the Bible. And I've been threatening this series for a while, but it's passages that cause us embarrassment. So it's Noah's Ark, it's the Nephilim, it's the today we're going to look at wives submit to your husbands,
talking donkeys.
Yes. So what we want to do is, we talk a lot about the Bible, and we talk a lot about approaching the Bible, and I thought it'd be fun to just look at some of these crazy passages over the course of the next few months. And, it'll be hit or miss, because as stuff comes up, I really want to talk about the Jerry Falwell Jr. Tweeting that Trump is the evangelicals the dream president. And I mean, there's still so much there, but I'm kind of worried about tackling it because I think people are just fatigued from all of that. But I want to talk about this whole religious liberty thing and about eradicating this amendment and turning churches into political activist centers, which I think would be horribly damaging. So, I mean, there's still a lot to talk about that's going on out in the world. But we thought we'd kick it off with wives, submit to your husbands. And so these passages are kind of the passages that I get questions about a lot. So here's a question we got about this one. Can you explain submission / the love and respect dichotomy described in Ephesians 5? Ephesians is a book of the Bible. I want to follow and obey God, but I've seen many poor examples of men abusing their power and women being disrespected in marriages. Yes. What does it mean to submit to a husband? Should love and respect go both ways? Absolutely. Does a man actually have the final say? As a single person, marriage doesn't sound that appealing if in the end my opinion isn't as important as a man's. Shouldn't all disagreements be discussed and both parties compromise at times? I would think having a mentality of submission authority would be detrimental to healthy and functioning relationships. Great question, single person. I think that is really good, and it sounds like you're a woman. Because men normally don't ask about this.
Weird.
So I know, shocking. So I want to do a little bit of background, and so first of all, I want to read the part of Ephesians that you're referencing, so I can reference it back. It's Ephesians 5:21. It says, "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so wives should submit to their husbands in everything." How much of things does that leave out?
None things.
None things. So that's pretty clear.
None more black.
Right. Then I don't know what. Oh, okay, got it. I was like, whoa. Then Paul goes on. Paul's the writer of Ephesians. He says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body." So this is the husbands are to love, wives are to submit. So this is the question: how in the world does that work in a healthy, functioning relationship? Now, there's a whole bunch of background that I've got to assume that I'm just going to briefly summarize going into this. All right, and then we'll get to the text. First, you never, ever, ever, ever take a verse like this or some of the passages we'll look at just out of the overall narrative structure of the Bible. We've said the Bible is fundamentally a story of what God's doing in the world. And so for me, the joke is I always start in Genesis because to me, the relationship between male and female begins in Genesis. And so I've talked about this before, and I know loads of folks disagree, but in Genesis 1 and 2, I don't see a hint of hierarchy between the man and the woman. Some people disagree with that and see hierarchy in the naming. We've talked about that before. Instead, I see in Genesis 1, male, female being created as both image bearers, equal in vocation and honor and dignity, and the reflecting of what God is like to the world. In Genesis 2, I see either a man who is gendered or an ungendered man. So either androgynous or just not gendered, split into male and female. Not good that the man is alone. I will create a woman to be his helper, but the word helper, of course, is the word ezer, very powerful, strong word. Rescuer is the better translation. So, and the man doesn't name the woman until God has decreed in Genesis 3 the woman, her desire will be for her husband, and the husband will rule over her. So to me, hierarchy is a result of the fall, of their sin. And so ultimately what I'm going to argue is Ephesians, the whole submit is the opposite. So let me go to Genesis 3 real quick. Your desire for your husband, the word desire in Hebrew is the same word that's used in Genesis 4 about sin's desire to master a guy named Cain. And so here it means it's not sexual desire. We wish that were true. Instead, it's her desire will be to master the man, and the man will desire to rule over her physically, by strength of domineering, personality, whatever. So instead of this beautiful complementarity, of inequality, we have now a power struggle. And so what I think Paul is arguing the reversal of that power struggle. So instead of mastering and controlling, it's submitting, and instead of ruling, it's loving. And so ultimately, that's where I'm going to go with this sucker.
Dang.
So Paul actually turns out to be way more, instead of hating women, Paul actually turns out to be revolutionary in his own way. So the first assumption I'm carrying into this is that God's intention wasn't for hierarchy. It was for complementarity and egalitarian, equality is the word I'm looking for. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that in the Roman and Greek world, all right, there were things called household codes. We've talked about these in an earlier podcast, where a guy named Aristotle argued that the household and really the city depends on three relationships: master-slave, husband-wife, father-child. And so household codes were expressions of moral ordering. And we've talked about this a bunch. Paul, like any good missionary, writes into a culture in its context while at the same time planting the seeds for its revolution and for its overthrow. And so I think what Paul's doing is operating within the household structure, but reordering it now around Christ and planting the seeds for the overthrow of the household structure and the way it was classically understood. So the example we used many podcasts ago was a woman in Saudi Arabia who's not allowed to drive, who can't receive an education, who's under the authority of whatever male, whether it's an uncle or a dad or a brother or husband, coming to Christ and reading, oh my goodness, I don't have to wear head coverings, and I'm there in Christ. There's no male and female, and totally free, and yet to reach her culture and to not be persecuted in a way that would extinguish gospel opportunity, she wears the head covering. She respects the authority, not because she thinks she's under it, but because it advances the gospel. The reason Paul gives household codes the way that he does is because his primary concern is advancing the message of Jesus within the culture in which he found himself. So he's doing two things. Number one, he is on the one hand expressing adherence to the cultural norms so that Christianity would gain a hearing and not be ruled, a dangerous, occult, whatever it is. Right. And at the same time, he's reordering these household codes around the new humanity present in Jesus.
Okay, so do you, to push this forward with that, because do you think the misunderstanding is often when we approach this stuff is that we read it as them advocating for what you're pointing out the difference.
Well, yes, he is advocating.
Right, but what he's advocating for something different than we assume.
Correct.
Like we usually hear, like, if someone talks about master slave in the Bible, we assume it's advocating for it rather than observing its norm.
Correct. If you're a missionary in a polygamous culture, we talk about this all the time. The first battle you're going to fight isn't polygamy. The first battle is God real? Right? Does a God exist? Is it one God, or is it many gods?
And you might refer to polygamy in the conversation.
Absolutely.
And the misunderstanding is like, well, aren't you advocating for it because you're referencing it? Yep. Okay.
No, Paul, and that's where Paul gets really misunderstood.
Yes.
These guys are missionaries speaking into cultures that were either hostile or apathetic. And like any missionary, Paul is doing two things. He's using the current structure, and advocating adherence. I mean, he even says this to slaves. He says, "Slaves, obey your masters," to make the gospel more attractive. And so, I mean, and it's radical to individualized Americans because nothing should get in the way of my rights, my destiny, my self-fulfillment. For Paul, it was, no, you subsume all of that to what advances the gospel. So you have to understand, Paul in Colossians and here and other places, he does these household codes, but he's doing them in a context that isn't our context. And secondly, he's doing them for missionary reasons. We did a whole podcast on this, so I don't want to say too much more. So first context is the Old Testament. Second context is the missionary context and thrust that Paul is speaking into. The third context is the book of Ephesians itself. And so in Ephesians, earlier in, they didn't have chapter divisions and so on. Earlier, oops, that's my mom. Hey, Mom.
Hello?
Hey, we're podcasting right now, so you'll be live to 50,000 people next week. So you want to say anything?
I love you very much, son, and I'm very proud of you.
Have you been drinking again, Mom? Have you been? I just want to. That's our daily call.
It is too early in the day.
Okay, but later.
If that is your wish, I can handle it.
All right, I'll call you later, baby.
Well, do it because I have an offer on my house.
Whoa. Okay.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Mama Rita right there.
Oh yeah.
So that's awesome, Mama Rita. All right, where were we? Oh, Ephesians. Yes. So didn't have chapter divisions and paragraphs and all those sorts of things. So this phrase that we just looked at, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, is actually grammatically connected to something that happens earlier. In 5:18, Paul says, "Be filled with the Spirit," and then there are 5 participles that indicate what happens when you are filled with the Spirit. Okay, right after that, and one of them is you speak to one another, you sing, you make music, you give thanks, and then the 5th one is that you submit to one another. So one of the results, one of the things that happens in a Holy Spirit filled community is that you submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So first, this whole conversation about submitting is connected to this idea of not being drunk with wine, but being filled with the Spirit, like my mother.
Mama Ritaville,
exactly. Yes, exactly right. Now, and not only that, but verse 22 is that says, "Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord," is grammatically linked to verse 21, which says to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Mm-hmm. So I need to say this again, man. I'm blowing up, dog. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ is verse 21. Verse 22, "Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands." Okay, now, that's how it reads in English. I'm looking at Greek. Andy can...
Whoa.
Yep.
We got slides going on in here.
Interlinear, where the Greek is on top and the English is literally placed underneath. Verse 21 reads, if you're just transliterating this, "Submit one another in reverence of Christ." And then here's verse 22, "The wives to their own husbands as to the Lord." Now, notice, submit one another in reverence of Christ, comma, the wives to their own husbands. Mm-hmm. What's missing there? Here's my English translation. Wives, or submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. That's what it says in English. Mm-hmm. Here's what it says in Greek. Submit one another in reverence of Christ, the wives to their own husbands. What's missing? Okay, so...
I was trying to track. I couldn't...
Okay, let me say it again.
Yeah.
Everyone's out there shouting at you that you missed this obvious. Okay, in English, right? My English Bible says, "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands."
Yourselves.
Nope, the Greek. "Submit one another in reverence of Christ, the wives to their own husbands." What's missing there?
My brain is shutting down.
Yeah,
I can't track.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you see why I was hoping this was Andy list today. What's missing is this command to submit in verse 22.
Okay. Yeah.
So it literally, my English Bible says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, and then wives, submit to your husbands.
Yes. Okay.
But in Greek, it reads, submit one another in reverence of Christ, wives to your own husbands. In other words, you cannot pull out verse 22, which says, wives, submit to your own husbands, without first reading verse 21, which is the predominant expression of spirit-filledness, or one of the expressions of spirit-filledness in the community is the submission of one another in reverence to Christ. And the word here used for one another is a word that I've read is used of equals. So the general principle is that Christians should submit to one another.
Yeah.
And then as an example, wives, do this to your husbands. Do you see how much that changes the argument?
Absolutely.
So instead of just ripping a verse that says, hey, wives, submit to your husbands on everything, it's no. It actually says, hey, submit to one another in reverence of Christ. And as an example, wives, do this to your husbands.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is a big deal. First, so that's the first thing, is that grammatically you can't separate these two verses.
Yeah.
You have to say, because the verse literally just reads, wives to their own husbands.
Right.
Okay. Well,
Right.
What wives to your husbands? What?
Yeah.
Well, so you have to borrow the submit word that was just used in the previous verse, and that word is used in the context of submitting to each other.
Right. Because we would say in common Christian subcultures and teaching cultures, if they don't do the homework and just grab that one verse and try to apply it to audience context, it to your point, it simply does not work if you're actually doing your good Greek study.
Oh, of course.
Backboning. Yep.
Of course, backboning. Now, so that's the first thing. The second word is, or the second thing to think about in terms of the specific text, is the word submit. And the way I've come to understand the word submit is very different from, I don't know, just the doormat, it's or whatever. The word submit is it's to place under in an orderly fashion.
Yeah.
So to submit means to place under in an orderly fashion. So it's intentional. It's a choice I make. But and it's done thoughtfully, but it's to place under. Now, what are you placing under? Well, it seems as if you're placing your interests under the interests of another person. So you're placing the interests of another person over your own interests, which Paul says in other places like Philippians that's what Jesus did, and that's what we should all do to each other. So this kind of flows the idea. So it's like when I need to get somewhere fast, and I'm dealing with stoplights, right? There's nothing physically stopping me, right? I could blow through a red light and there's no barrier, there's nothing. But in the interest of, traffic safety and in interest of my health and the health of others, I place my desire to get somewhere quickly under obedience to the traffic laws.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yes.
So I've just submitted to the traffic laws.
Yes.
So it's not a passive, it's not a doormat, it's a intentional placing under my interests and placing over someone else's interests above my own.
Yes.
Now, so the word submit even doesn't mean the person has the final say. It doesn't, that's reading into the text here. It just simply says, hey, the general practice of disciples of Jesus who are filled with the Spirit is to place the well-being of others ahead of their own well-being. Wives, do this to your husbands, as unto the Lord.
Right.
And do this in everything. Yeah. Now, that still could sting and go, okay, well, you've softened it a little bit, but it still just seems very ridiculous. In the culture of that day, and we could spend loads of time here. I mean, Ephesus was known for the worship of a goddess called Artemis, and Artemis was a fertility goddess, among other things. And there was this month called the Artemision. One of those is the temple. One of those is the month-long celebration, where you would just engage as a man in sexual infidelity with as many temple prostitutes as possible, because the way to get a fertility goddess to act fertile on your behalf is to, that's what you did to worship. And, such a bummer that doesn't happen today.
Have you heard of Burning Man?
Okay. There you, I stand corrected. Now, so the worship of Artemis is a part in what Paul is writing here. Also, the way that Greek and Roman women were seen. I mean, they were seen primarily as raisers of the household. I mean, they weren't. I mean, I have so many quotes. One Greek writer said, we have courtesans or prostitutes for pleasure. We have handmaidens for the day-to-day care of the body, and we have wives to bear legitimate children. Right? That's that you kind of owed them. Under Roman law, a roof over their head, the opportunity to bear children. I mean, that was it. You didn't owe them anything. You didn't owe them date nights and love languages and, none of that.
Right.
So the revolutionary part of Paul's writing here wasn't, hey, wives, submit to your husbands. I mean, That's what wives were there for. I mean, it was codified in Roman law that the man was the head of the house and had the power of life and death in some instances over the members of the house, right? I mean, this was like no duh.
Yeah.
The thing that was revolutionary is that when Paul doesn't just stop at wives, but he spends like 3 or 4 more times more words on husbands than the wives. So the revolutionary part wasn't wives submit to your husbands. The revolutionary part was husbands love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now, see, and there was a reason why women were way more into early Christianity than men, and this is one of them. Because the command to love your wives as you would love yourself, which he says later in this passage, but here, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So that was revolutionary, that a husband would owe his wife love, and not just any kind of love, self-sacrificial love. And then he uses this word head. He says, the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. Great. Well, what's that mean? And there's a big debate over does head mean source of? Does head mean authority over? That's for another time. But here, the idea of head, Paul ties to sacrifice, because just as the husband is head of the wife as Christ is head of the church. And what did Christ do? Just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So whatever headship means in this passage, headship doesn't mean final decision. Headship means head sacrificer. Yeah. The head blesser. The head lover.
Head submitter.
Right.
I mean, even if that sounds correct.
So what you've got is first Paul saying, hey, number one of the things that will happen in a spirit-filled community is that people will submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And wives, do this to your husbands, because the husband is the head of the wife, and you should do this in everything. But husbands, love your wives, and your headship should be expressed in the sacrificial love, the same sacrificial love that Jesus had for the church. Your sacrificial love should emulate that. Oh, my Lord. Now no one was saying this. Right? None of the Aristotelian household codes that I know of had that attached to it, right? Right. So Paul, far from being a woman hater, was elevating and calling men to account. I mean, this was a super big deal. And he not only, talks about, the word submit, what that means, and one another, and reverence, and wives, submit to your husbands and to the Lord, but think about if hierarchy was... Is this the gardeners? Of course.
Of course.
If hierarchy was the result of the fall, your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. What's the opposite of ruling? Serving. Yeah. And what's the opposite of trying to master? Submitting. Right?
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
So he's playing within the household codes in order so that the gospel has a hearing, but he's revolutionizing the household codes without overturning them.
Right. Because would it seem that if Paul was to say, if you were to suggest equivocal sacrifice,
right?
You wouldn't give that to wives because of to your point, in that particular culture, men could decide life or death depending on certain circumstances. Correct. So for a woman at that time to quote unquote sacrifice herself in that way, it wouldn't pertain to any value.
No, it was just assumed.
Right. But then exactly. So therefore, if a man was then to actually sacrifice his self-interest for the sake of love, for the sake of submitting to his wife, perhaps might call him away from a lot of the stuff happening in Ephesus that you played out.
And here's the thing that's so interesting. Paul writes to husbands, fathers, and masters. That's all one person in the household. Okay. That's just the guy.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay. And then he writes to wives, children, and slaves. And when you look at what is being instructed there, I mean, you're seeing boundaries that just simply didn't exist around the authority of the man. So if Paul were writing this stuff today, he would still want us to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Why? Because that's the predominant way Christians are to relate. What about a husband and wife? Would he argue headship in the same way? I don't think he would. I used to think so. I used to think headship reflected the ordering of creation. I don't buy that argument anymore. I think the scripture teaches the ordering of creation was male-female equality. Therefore, for my wife and I, we have a relationship where there are parts of spiritual headship that I carry. There are parts that she carries. There are parts of running the household that she carries. There are parts that I carry. And it's not based on our maleness or femaleness. It's based on our giftedness. What are the gifts that God's given us, right? And it's based on a bit of calling as well, right? So I do the finances not because I'm the man, but because I was a finance guy.
Yeah.
My wife cooks. Not because she's a woman, but because I cannot. It's that sort of thing. So we have a traditional marriage in a regard that it's a husband and a wife and our kids, and we talk about things. And there have been times my wife has just deferred to me in decision making. But that's not in any way, shape, or form because I'm a man and she's a woman.
Yeah.
It's because that's the way our particular relationship is cashed out. Now, I know other relationships where the woman is a total prayer warrior, the man is not. But the man is the spiritual head of the household. Well, I don't even know what that means.
Yeah.
Where do you get that in terms of what we pack it with? Now, okay, man is head of the household. Okay, I can see where you could pull that out of Ephesians. But the only thing I can pull out of that is head sacrificer. I don't pull like head decision maker out of that. I don't pull like breadwinner out of that.
Right.
So I just see these sort of, and we all do this, but we add layers of extra biblical stuff. And the goal is to always try to wipe as much of that away as possible. So you see the heart of the text, and the heart of this text, clearly is to put the beauty of Jesus on display by how we treat each other. And the primary unit for how we treat each other is the household. So in my view, I actually think rather than being a source of embarrassment, I think this text is beautiful. And we're not even getting into the analogy that Paul is making between husband and wife and Jesus and the church. So that the point of marriage isn't even marriage. The point of marriage is to actually advance the gospel, to give a living, breathing picture. Just think about it. How hard is it to submit to somebody who would die for you in an instant? And how hard is it to love somebody who's placing her interests below the interests of you? Again, that don't stereotype this or extend it too far, but like that sort of self-giving love between two people is a picture of the self-giving love that God has in himself through Father, Son, and Spirit. That's the idea.
Yeah. And this whole, it's such a fascinating, it really is truly for me a fascinating conversation. Cause there's so much going on even in other sects of Christian subculture with,
That's SECTS.
Yes, correct. Where, you have all these very powerful male speakers speaking to guys and being like, well, you got to step up in the household and, you're the head. So these are the things you should be doing. But it's so interesting because what you say, though, because I feel... But
what are the things?
Right, because some of those things seem contrary to this. But like, for example, like to overly define spiritual householdness, headness.
How about this?
Right.
If you're wondering how you should step up, how about this? Be the first one to apologize. That seems like head sacrificer. If you're a family of 4 and there's food for 3, you're the one that goes without. How about that?
Yeah.
Like, let's spell it out that way instead of authoritarian.
Yes.
Right. And because authoritarian just mirrors the culture Paul was writing into.
Right. Well, and it's funny because in certain ways, I think what I'm saying too is that I think our culture isn't, while some of the practices that supported that aspect of patriarchy, it's just different now, but I can totally see it in our culture in a lot of different ways.
And let's take you and Mercedes.
Uh-oh.
Well, I know, because I know stuff. I got secrets. No, so if a Christian woman is raised to believe that the man is the spiritual leader, and a Christian man is raised to believe that he's the spiritual leader, but then they get together, and all of a sudden, the man realizes the woman is a sinner, and the woman realizes the man is a sinner, and not just any sinner, but very specifically has very specific weaknesses and addictions or whatever it is. How can you not help but be disappointed in how that whole thing's going to cash out, right?
Yep.
Because we're packing spiritual leader with things that I'm not quite sure.
Yes.
So as a man, am I held accountable for the spiritual condition of my house? Well, sure. So is my wife.
Right.
I mean, as parents, that's one of our obligations. And do I feel an obligation to love and respect and serve my wife? Yeah, I promised that I would. I see that in the scriptures about how Jesus treats the church. Of course, absolutely. But I don't do it because I'm a man. I do it because I'm a disciple of Jesus.
Right.
And out of that discipleship comes, how do I do husbanding in a way that honors Jesus? How do I do parenting in a way that honors Jesus?
Right.
And that also is very specific to my set of gifts and non-gifts.
Yes. Because you'd even be specific about like where I sit and all that. Because like I think I often feel an overwhelming sense of disappointment because I have this own picture of what I was supposed to look like as a husband,
right.
which in some ways was affirmed in some of Mercedes' expectations of
Absolutely.
what I would be like. Right. And I get into this now and I'm actually married. And we've talked about relational transformation, like becoming a husband and then fulfilling becoming a husband.
That's right.
I think a lot of us assumed turnkey the second I got married that I was going to be able to be that kind of person, but it's as I'm 7 years in almost here to marriage, it's like, yeah, do I pray every single night for my family? No. Do I pray every single day for my kids? No. Do I find myself like suffering from sloth and laziness and other things like that? Absolutely. And
Chemex addiction.
I think, my addiction to Chemex and specialty slow pour coffee. I mean, it's I guess, but to your point though, where do I seek my conviction to action? Because it seems that if I were to frame that through trying to be reactive and responsive to Mercedes' disappointment in me for not doing that,
right.
I feel like I'll constantly just arrive at more disappointment as thing goes on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if to your point, if I'm trying to orient to try to be like, well, what is Jesus doing here? What advances gospel? Like, how am I driven towards that?
Right.
And then how do I find relational fulfillment in my Christ-likeness and husbandness? It seems what you're saying is that becomes my new direction. Because I think totally what I do see in a lot of friends that I have and family and other conversations happening out there is you're always running up against reactiveness between the husband and wife. Well, if she's like this, then you need to be like this. And this is expected of you, so you should be like this.
Right.
Rather than this conversation of what is Jesus doing in this conversation, with you and him?
That's right.
What is those in? Because I think if both parties were oriented towards that, the role play and conviction looks different. Right. Instead of looking at each other and bouncing off each other in disappointment and reaction,
right.
Instead it's like, how do we best serve each other toward a gospel fulfillment?
Exactly. Yes. So part of the marriage becomes learning my wife and what she needs, what communicates respect, what communicates delight, what communicates joy to her.
Yeah.
And that's different from Mercedes.
Yes.
And growing into the kind of man, which has taken me years and now I'm perfect, growing into the kind of man that desires to be a blessing to my wife, and knowing that out of that blessedness comes all the goods that you would want. It's like sleep. If you're aiming at sleep, you'll never get it. Or happiness. If you're aiming at happiness, you'll never get it. But if you're aiming at something bigger, you'll get that and realize, oh, we've got a great relationship too.
Right.
And so for me, to know that I am held accountable for how I love and treat my wife, without having predispositions towards, well, I've got to do this role because I'm a man and she's got to do this role as a woman. And no, I mean, do I think women in general can be better at some things and men in general can be better at other things? Sure. I have no issue with the fact that men and women are complementary to each other. Love that.
Right.
We're not identical. Hallelujah for that. But there has to be permission for the exceptions, right? You sit around some women and they are just tigers, and they married a guy who's very quiet. And if you're this big authoritarian guy, then you're saying, well, the guy's got to run that show. And yet, and you're emasculating the guy if he doesn't.
Right.
I'm just like, I want to be really careful with that.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's always true.
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. And it seems like there's just been this straight line of like that's taken place in our contemporary culture that suggests that that's the only way to really fulfill this idea of spiritual headship in the household. And I'm with you. And I'm like, it just can't be.
And maybe some ways, maybe there are, and I've met couples that have very good defined roles that are traditional.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Right.
It's just when we become prescriptive for everybody that I just say, that's not really submitting to one another out of reverence
Yes.
for Christ. That's just submitting to an ideal that I don't see directly from the text in all of its facets.
Yes.
So I think that's the bigger issue. Now for our single ladies, does the guy even hint that he's capable of growing into this kind of person? How he treats you when you're dating. So when he's embarrassed, when he's angry, when he's too frisky, how does he even open himself up or present himself as somebody capable of placing his needs and well-being under your needs and well-being? And in some cases, God and time and crisis can change somebody, no question. But if you're sitting there, you're a woman, you're asking this question, and you're saying, well, I see some Christian guys who just play I'm the head of the household card. Well, flee. If they're packing that in ways that aren't biblical. But there's the other side of, we just prolong adolescence now. And, if the guy's 35 and living at home playing video games all day and working at Domino's, maybe not a guy that, now I live in my house playing video games and I wouldn't mind Domino's, but, my point isn't the specific job. My point is, does this person give any indication that they're the kind of person that either because of the who they are naturally or because of what Jesus is doing in them can be this kind of person, right? You've got to see glimpses of it, or you should just get the heck out,
right? Because
that's the invitation. The invitation isn't to fulfill some predetermined roles. The invitation is, as we're filling out our marriage and feeling out our relationship and how we're going to do money and how we're going to do parenting, is there the general tenor that we submit to each other when if our well-beings conflict? If that's true, if you get glimpses of that in dating, man, that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And for dudes to learn to be the kind of dude where head sacrificer doesn't throw you off, right? Head garbage taker out or head forgiver. Whatever it is, that's pretty awesome. So again, there's loads to disagree with. Textually, marriage therapists could throw all kinds of stuff in here. We just wanted to do a little work on this very embarrassing passage and to say, I think there's more room here for what Paul's doing than kind of normally expressed. So anyway, to that end, would love your feedback, would love your suggestions about why you're embarrassed. Like we got a great question last week about Noah. And this person, I don't know if it's a she, but this person said, I have 2 pre-Christian friends who will not believe the Jesus story because of Noah and the ark. That's interesting. Yeah. All right. So let's spend some time on that.
Yeah. We had another one come in this week too, related to the idea of embarrassed by the Bible. Like, what do you mean by that? So we'll address that, I think, with that episode too.
Okay.
That's good.
All right. So my brothers and sisters, bless you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you, be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance to you, and may he give you peace. We're found at voxpodcast.com. Our community is voxoc.com. Man, that's all I got. If you want to support us, Patreon, we have just a very gracious community of people who are supporting us, and I'm buying books and studying for Revelation, and we're taking ground on that. So I've got about 20 podcasts that are about... Whew, well, they're probably 30% ready.
Okay. Wow.
But yeah, I can't just write one at a time. You know what I mean? It's like, there's just, and this is all prep. We're not even to the text yet. This is all like theme of Revelation and author of Revelation. It's like, oh my Lord. So this is a monster, but all that is to say, it's so fun.
Yeah. Definitely take some time to check out our website. We've added a few things, a new featured section where you can kind of go through everyone that we've had on our show as guests. Yep. And then I'll also be adding on a little section to break things down by topic. So, because of some of SoundCloud's features, we could playlist content. So I'll be making more direct links where on the site you can click topic, and then from there you'll get to see everything we've talked about regarding women in leadership. Embarrassed by the Bible will become a new topic playlist, so you can kind of jump in and grab these big conversations, at least hit them one at a time instead of scrolling through the entire podcast feed trying to find one at a time episodes on a lot of this stuff. So great, that's it all right,
till next time.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Vox Podcast. Learn more about us at voxpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at the Vox Podcast, and now support us on Patreon at patreon.com/voxpodcast.